Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit record. So Susanna, you're ready to go.
Great. Welcome everyone to the, where are we? February 23rd, Redstone HPC meeting. And we'll call the meeting to order at 6 p.m.-ish. And Jason, you want to take over, call the roll?
Yeah, sure. We have a quorum and we'll call the roll. I'll do it in order that I see on the screen here. Dorothea Ferris,
Yes, thank you.
Nancy Cromie,
Present.
Sure.
and Kathy Montgomery. Jason James is present as well. And then I think we're ready for the minutes, right?
Yep.
All right. Did anybody have any notes or comments on the minutes from the last meeting?
As far as I can remember, they register what we approved. I would move approval.
I second.
All right. And Susanna, it's been so long since we've done this. That's really all we need to do, right?
Yeah. And
The
technically,
minutes are good.
the recording now is the technical minutes. And I'm just providing you these kind of as a reminder of what we discussed, since it's been somewhat few and far between.
Right. All right. The minutes are approved as provided. And then Susanna, I think it's next right back to you for the next thing.
Yes, so the next two things are issues that came up over the course of the last few months that have been lingering out there that I just wanted to do a quick check-in with you on them. And also I should mention that I'm going to add Dorothea to the list of items just to give us a quick overview of the Cattlemen's Association property at the end of Redstone Boulevard that has the potential to be in flux. So I just wanted her to give us a quick overview of that. But I will start with the pop-up tents. So this came up last summer, I believe, or fall. One of the residential properties on the boulevard had installed a pop-up tent. And I'm not exactly clear whether it had sides on it or not at that point in time, but Joanna did issue a red tag on that. I discussed it briefly with the owner, and he pointed out that there were several other pop-up tents on the boulevard as well. And the issue is that when the pop-up tent has sides on it, it counts in floor area, according to the county. If it doesn't have sides on it, it still has to meet the zoning requirements. So it still has to meet setbacks and other zoning criteria. So you basically have to apply for a pop-up tent permit the same way you'd have to apply for a shed permit. And so I told Joanna that I would discuss this with you and see how if you wanted to do anything about it, or if you just want to leave the situation with the status quo, which would be pop-up tents can only have no sides and have to comply with the setbacks and various other zoning requirements. It kind of is at odds a little bit with our guidelines, because we talk about temporary structures as being actually temporary, and we only want to approve them if there's a specific timeline associated with it. So I think we have to be either more vigilant about controlling the pop-up tent, or we have to say that provided they meet, the requirements that already exist in the county, we're okay with them. And I just wanted to kind of take your temperature on how you felt about that.
So I'll jump in there first, and I want to be completely transparent. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes,
So my son is one of the pop-up tent popper-uppers. And so I just want to be totally on the table about that. And it was for keeping tree sap off his car. No sides were on that, and it was temporary, and he took that down. I do know that there were a lot of other pop-ups this summer for why, I don't know. I know the general store had a couple pop-ups for a couple months, you know, to keep the sun off while people had breakfast, coffee, tea, whatever, for their guests, their retail guests. So that was kind of a new event as well. I don't think it had sides on those either.
Mhm.
And then one of the hotels in town had pop-up tents that were visible from the boulevard for special events. I think they kind of come and go. So that's my input.
Okay.
And so Susanna, just to get a little bit more information, there's no definition of a temporary use as it relates to the zoning code, but the guidelines talk about potentially temporary uses.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
think we talk about, and I'll have to look it up. Well, I apologize for not getting you new copies of the guidelines yet, but I'm working on it. I think it was in the context of signage and construction, you know, trailers and things like that. That kind of, we have a little, you
Yeah.
know, statement about temporary structures that people wanted to do. I think it primarily was an issue of construction sheds and things like that. And it might be under the shed guidelines. So yeah, basically the pop-up fits into the definition of a accessory structure.
Right.
Okay. And so this may be more of a question for Joanna, but it kind of contextualizes where we would or would not provide feedback. And that's, so if you are to put up like an easy up for an afternoon, you're technically in violation of the zoning code for that afternoon.
If it is within the setback on your property.
Got
Yep.
it. And is there a duration associated with that? And, you know, like putting it up for the weekend or?
I don't think there is from the county's point of view. I think that the temporariness of it falls into our,
Mhm.
under our guidelines.
Okay.
That's the overlap.
Yeah, it actually seems like kind of a complicated conversation.
It
to
is.
me.
and
It
I
is.
probably need to get a little more information from Joanna about the exact issues.
Mhm.
This has kind of been hanging on for a while.
Sure. Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it seems like intuitively there's a difference between one that's put up for people events versus one that's put up to store things in vehicles or otherwise. But like at some point, we end up
There's
with
no-
these like very thin distinctions, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no language.
Yeah.
question. Is this something that would, you know, there aren't any historic districts like Redstone in Pitkin County to the degree that Redstone exists with its history. I think there are 2 points of view here, that we need certain things. There are certain, Skip Bell mentioned this very well one time at one of our meetings. Living in an historic district does not mean you give up the rights to have a lifestyle that is resembles what you need in today's world. But if we want to maintain the historic integrity and the history and the rules of behavior for living in an historic village that is as unique as Redstone, I think we need to be very clear and knowledgeable and honest about what it is we're trying to protect there, why it's necessary to do that to maintain the integrity. So I hope this comes to a point where we can clarify this enough so that someone who's in the historic district doesn't have to think, gee, I can do this, but I hope it's okay, and isn't restrained from being able to do those things that don't really destroy the history of the boulevard by doing that, because it's
Right.
done in a planned and fashioned way. I guess I remember Skip's making that very clear, and he's been involved in certainly in the historic preservation of that place for a long time. And Nancy and Jason living there. I think we need the conversation rather than, well, it's okay, I guess we let it go a while. I think it needs to be clear to all who are involved in that and want to be. So whenever that shows up, I would like to not just let it drift and let people think they're doing something wrong or that it doesn't really matter, because I think both things are true.
So
Right.
here's
And-
my email from Joanna. Basically, if the tents have walls on them, they count toward floor area.
Mhm.
So I don't think we want to get into that conversation at all.
Right.
Basically, the walled tent is off the table. The,
Right.
if the tent is still considered an accessory structure and has to comply with height and setbacks. So unless we make an exception to that, then any kind of pop-up would have to be, go get a permit, because they have to show that they're complying with height and setback. I think I mean, personally, I'm fine with the weekend pop-up, or something that, is for a specific event. And I don't know how we do that in a responsible way. But I think if one of these showed up in everyone's driveway for the winter or for the summer or whatever, and stayed the entire summer, that would be an issue for us in the district.
I was going to say that the Art Foundation does the winter holiday market,
Mhm.
and those often have pop-up tents just for one day.
Yeah,
And they're not set back far from the boulevard. They're on private property. but
right.
They're not.
So
set-
all these are on private property that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'll talk about a little more with Joanna, but maybe there's a way we can say, event tents are fine and put a time limit on them. And then if there starts being a problem, then we can sort of take it to the next level.
I
So
agree.
you're
Thank
talking
you.
about a one-day event?
Yeah. So that would be fine. If it's up for 30 days, then we might start having an issue with it.
Yeah,
So then the
that's-
BOCC would have to put language to that? I mean, I'm not following.
Well, there already is language in the land use code
Yeah,
that
yeah,
calls that.
Yeah.
So that person would have to apply for a permit. And so there, in that way, we would have the opportunity to review it at that point in time.
gotcha.
And perhaps we can even address it ourselves and draft language that the historic board can say, yes, that would meet our needs and satisfy our concerns. And we provide it to the county to say, perhaps you can look at this in your review, rather than having them draft something that in some cases they don't really know a lot about how to do, and then have it approved
Yeah.
or not approved by them, and then amended by us and back and forth. I'm just thinking of that as a way to simplify it. Because,
Yeah, and
you
it
know,
would be the kind of thing that I could sign off on as a staff level review with the
Yes.
caveat that it can only be up for
yes.
10
yes.
days. Maybe, I don't know. We might want to just pick a number.
Good, okay.
As a quick note too, as the general store, this has been an issue since we bought the store of needing shade. And so this is great that I happened to be on this meeting to be a guinea pig in a way of
Can I
getting
hold,
it
can I just ask you to hold on for a
correctly.
second? And because
Yes.
you need to state your name for the record, please. Just say your name for the record before you,
Rochelle.
thanks. Okay,
So what, just, I was just gonna say what, I guess for me as a business owner, I need to talk to Picken County first, it sounds like, but then they'll full circle to you.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And so Susanna, is it fair? And I guess to the rest of the group, it's the three things I hear that we're talking about are location, duration, and format.
Yep.
Are the three kind of important components.
So I think a day, a personal day or an event, we're going to say pop-ups are okay with that. For somebody like Rochelle might want to apply for a permit to do some pop-ups that might be up for a month or for the summer. And then we just make sure that there was an actual time then they were coming down. And then that could be approved at my level without bringing it back to you guys. And then we could also just get the zoning permit for those and go through the process on that. Does that seem like it makes sense to everyone?
Mhm.
It does to me.
Yes.
Okay, I will pass that along to Joanna and we'll figure out how to publicize that. Okay. Great. So this next item, non-informational signage. This came up at the BOCC review of our guidelines. And basically our guidelines deal with informational signage, which is the same signage that is controlled by the county code. Non-informational signage is that the flags, the seasonal flags and your house name and, stuff that's on the decorative side as opposed to actual business signage. Now, also in that category are political signs. And somebody called in with a concern that there were signs in the residential area that were political signs or might be considered issue signs, and they wanted to see those gone. And I think it was at that point, it was because the person didn't agree with the statement being made on the political sign. I told the board that we would talk about it. We don't have to take any action on it. We can decide that, political signage in itself has limitations on it. It can only be up for the duration of that political event, that election or whatever. But the other signs are kind of more issue signs. I'm trying to think of, without naming names. I think signs like, supporting a cause or not supporting a cause, type of signs. I don't know if you guys have opinion on that. I think it's a transient thing. I would not want to try to regulate that because I think it's an incredibly gray area in terms of the law. But I said to the BOCC that I would put that out there for you guys to talk about.
When I get a chance, I have a comment.
Okay.
Okay, Save Thompson Divide is a sign that comes to mind that you see all over Carbondale, and they last year round if you want. And then I think I started on that board 10 years ago. So they've been around for a long time and they come and go. So what you want to do does affect where they're going to get put in along the boulevard. And if that's okay for political signs, I think it's worth a discussion from people from Redstone. The other is, Kathy, remember, were you with us on the on the scenic byway, when we were discussing signs, I remember counting signs in both directions along the byway and the kind of signs they were and whether people wanted them there and didn't want them there. I'm sure the discussion would be very similar, and it was driving in on Highway 133 from 82, and what do you see? The first thing we saw was the power station and then the number of signs. And everyone we talked to before it became the byway was, oh my God, can we get rid of some of these signs that are not essential just to find our way around and to look attractive? I don't know just what the feeling is towards signs now. You don't want to hear my comment about development and signs as you enter the West Elk Loop Byway from 82 right now. That's not our issue. I think it's an important discussion. People are very concerned about the signs that cover a lot of what is attractive along a route. So I don't know what the rules are right now about the signs and the amount of signs. But
Well, I wanna
both the byway
clarify
and Redstone
Yeah,
have an
we're
interest.
really just talking about the boulevard. I don't think we have the
Yes,
ability
the Boulevard is,
to do anything
okay, good.
on the highway.
Yeah.
Um,
And what
Because
are the issues? Have you identified the specific issues?
Yeah, so it
Of what
is that Save Thompson Divide yard sign, or, you know, I'm for more green space yard sign.
Right, right.
You know, something that's not necessarily tied to a political season, but has a political message or a quasi-political message.
And those signs in Redstone have been up for over a year, probably
Yeah.
2 years now. And
What
yeah.
sign? What signs?
Can I say it? Is it all right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about it.
It's the Black Lives Matter signs that are the issue for some people.
Well, I've had that in my yard. Jason has one in his yard. I mean,
I know
Kay
there are
Bell
probably
has had
4 or
one in
5
her
of them
yard.
on the boulevard, so.
That's what I'm saying right now. We're talking about the boulevard. I mean,
I
I've had it in my yard. Jason has one in his yard or has. Kay Bell has had one in her yard. The Redstone
Are there
Cliffs has
those
had
who are
one.
opposed to it now? Are
I'm
people
sorry?
bringing it up now? Are people bringing it
I
up
don't know.
now as an issue?
Yes,
know.
so this is what
But
came
it's-
up at the
yeah.
BOCC meeting. A person expressed their distaste of that particular message and wanted us to regulate those signs. And I told the BOCC that we would discuss it. Doesn't have to go anywhere. We don't have to do anything about it. We're just having the discussion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm glad we're having the discussion. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The historic district has such great guidelines right now. But to take that person's, like, I'm not going to put a Bobert sign in my yard, but if I wanted to, I should be able to do that.
Mhm.
That's my
Oh,
opinion.
God.
I don't know what to say. I don't know how you stop that.
I don't know either. And I don't know how we
No.
could enforce something like that, even if we had those guidelines.
Yeah.
So I
Could it be only on the boulevard?
Yes. Well, the historic district, I guess.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not, I wouldn't have that one sign either, and I don't mind the sign in your yard, but without talking about the topic of the signs. Personally, I'm very offended to drive through downtown of some of the towns in Western Colorado and see Trump and Bobert signs all over the place, where Western Colorado is a beautiful part of the state. We're fortunate to be in a place that's beautiful. Perhaps the historic district is one site that, without taking a position with the sign, these signs are okay, but a Bobert sign is not okay, isn't solving the problem. I think
No.
perhaps the historic district should be clear of signs.
No, I don't.
I think it's a free speech issue. I don't think.
I
we
do
can
too. Yeah, I
say
don't think you
that
can
you
do
can't
that.
have it.
Nope.
Okay,
So
what do most historic districts do that are very strict in communities?
I actually don't know what kind of
I don't know.
regulation they have. You know, vote for so
I-
and
I don't-
so has a time limit on it. But just a kind of booster sign doesn't really, it's just a free speech issue because you can,
I see. Okay.
Something like that, Susanna, does it have a size limitation in the county code? I know for permanent signs, we have very, very clear and
yeah.
specific
Actually, I'm not
language.
sure about that. I can look that up.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
You know, it's the same kind of idea of if everybody put an easy up in their front yard, all up and down the boulevard, it would have a material impact. And so if everybody put up a large whatever issue sign in their
Yeah.
front yard, it would have a material impact on the boulevard. And if there's already, you know, to me, there's a break point between behaving like curators of the guidelines that protect the historic integrity of the district long term versus behaving like an HOA board. And this one hovers really, really close to the latter, and I worry about that, right?
Yeah.
But I also would understand that, you know, there are limitations to what's appropriate in terms of the overall impact. And so this isn't about content or issues at all, but is there anything that would be discourage or prohibit in the county code? You know, I don't know, that happening, people putting up 5x5 issue signs and in their front yard and having those populate all up and down the boulevard.
I will look into it. One of the provisions we have in our Redstone sign code is that pretty much anything we don't address directly reverts to the county sign code.
Yep.
So if that exists in the county sign code, then we don't have to do anything different.
Yeah.
So you'll find out what's in the county's sign code that would affect us. Great.
Yep.
One of the other things that we talked about, specifically, it was a different application, but it was a commercial sign. And we got into pretty deep discussion about the difference between a piece of interpretive art and a sign. And that was not a definition that we were at all interested in trying to navigate.
Right.
And so I think
Right.
this will end up there very quickly as well. You know, I take my Black Lives Matter sign out of the little fence post and I paint it by hand on a board, and I've created a work of art that I would like to display in my front yard. You know, is it something different or not?
Right.
So I worry about the unintended consequences of good intentions of maintaining appropriate character.
And to go along with that, the fact that it has been addressed to recognize the needs of a free society, but our signs have been addressed. Once we can say that, we've come a long way, rather than, oh, look what they are allowing to happen. I'd rather say, no, we've addressed the issue and this is fair to everyone involved.
Mhm.
That's what I'm trying to put on the back shelf,
Okay.
Mhm.
not the sign.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any more on that one? Okay, and I will look into that and report back to you.
Thank you.
Just a couple of other minor things. It doesn't look like the house that we approved back in June will go forward.
Up
So,
on Firehouse Road.
yeah. I have gotten an inquiry for another one of those Bighorn lots, so we may be seeing that at some point. And I do
Okay.
expect us to have a case for next month. So mark it on your calendars that we'll probably have a meeting next. Let's see, let me look at the date. That would be the 16th of March, which is awfully soon.
Hmm.
And so if that's too soon, we might push that one to the 23rd just to give us the usual 4 weeks between meetings.
I was saying, I'm not
Sorry,
Did
Kathy,
you-
you were breaking up.
I'm out of town on the 23rd,
Okay.
16th.
And I haven't received an application yet, so it may be that they won't be ready in time for March.
Okay.
Okay. And then I just wanted Dorothea to give us a 2-minute heads up on the cattleman's property at the end of the boulevard, just so we're informed that there is potentially something happening there.
Okay, it's referred to as the Redstone pasture. It's and the relatives or the immigrants from Aosta settled in the valley and bought land from Osgood's widow at the base of Coal Basin. They moved to this country because they wanted to own land and farm, and that was part of the project. By the late 1990s, according to this, the owners with no cattle interest, the descendants of the original ranchers who no longer were ranchers, wanted a way to cash out. It's a 70-acre parcel. It is parallel to Highway 133 on the west side of the highway. The firehouse is across the river from this property. So for about 25 years, there's been this problem and threats of lawsuits and so on. So it's reaching a point of some discussion. And it's on the scenic byway. I think it's important to recognize it both as that and the scenic quality of Redstone. It's also part of the corridor to the National Forest. So the Forest Service is involved. 5 ranching families today use this parcel as a working base for the forest permit. They have corrals, a tack shed, and trailers that can never be moved anywhere. They're all very old and falling down. The cattle are hauled there in the spring. They're allowed to pair up before moving on and then gather there in the fall. That's the extent of the use there. The individuals who want out of this agreement would like to have economic gain. There was some discussion of selling TDRs from that property so that it is not developed. It continues to be used for the historic use. And that fund would buy out the non-cattle interests of the people who have rights to the land. So the land would be conserved, would be open space. There's no structure on the property other than the cattle buildings that are sort of falling apart. And for some reason, Dale Will and Picken County Open Space wasn't in support of it for some reason that I don't understand. But I just want to make sure that the Historic Commission, Redstone Historic Society, is aware that this is going on, that the discussion is happening, because the developers who want to buy the property are interested in putting in about 40 homes on the property.
Wow.
That to me just made me think, you want 45 homes that are going to exit that property on the boulevard? And I don't know where it's going. I am not close to the discussion. I just want to make sure, Susanna, that you are given the information as it moves along so that something doesn't happen and all of a sudden the residents of Redstone are facing 40 new structures that have been placed on the property.
Dorothea, tell
before.
me exactly the location.
Okay, it's across from the firehouse. Parallel to Highway 133 on the west side of the highway. The Redstone Firehouse is across the river from the property.
Right, okay. Is it, okay,
Can you see that, Nancy?
yes, I do. And is that, and I could be totally way off here. Is that like is that the Nislanic quote unquote place? No,
No, it's still part of the ranching community. I don't know any other title than this, but it's referred to as the Redstone pasture in the
And it's kind of
information that I was.
it's cooperatively owned, right?
Right. And Doug's parents came from Worcester, and they were one of the original ranchers when they moved over there. And so that's why he
But is-
called me and talked to me, and I wrote the letter.
Is that where the cattle come and go spring and fall?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's what
yes.
I'm asking. That's what I'm asking. I
Oh,
got you.
okay.
I got
Okay.
you.
I thought I had said that. Sorry about
No,
it.
I'm sorry.
But I
I'm
just don't want it to get lost by the committee.
No, yeah. Okay,
It's a 70-acre parcel.
right. 70, huh? That's, yeah.
And I just looked at the map, the southernmost corner, kind of the southeasternmost corner
Mhm.
is in the district, but a vast majority of the acreage is not, just for what it's worth.
Right. Okay, so it goes up behind that southeast area, goes to the Milan and Eva property, to that backside. I call it Milan, the Brannick property. It's probably sold by now, but do you
It
know what I'm
is.
talking about?
Yeah, there's two intervening properties between those
Okay. Oh,
that I
there
can
is.
see. I'm just looking at the Pickens County GIS.
Okay, gotcha.
Here, I
Okay.
can just repopulate that. Even 3 intervening properties. This is the property right here. And
I just would be upset if something happened and, oh gee, we should have told the people in
Right.
Redstone.
mhm,
That's all.
I'm sure this is not going to be a quick discussion in terms of going forward with the owners and the
Right.
county. So
Right.
I suspect we'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about it.
yeah,
Wow.
Except the people who want it to be sold are very eager to have it sold, and the people who want more housing are very eager to find a place that can hold more housing. So things seem to happen. Oh, we didn't get a chance to discuss that. We had such a need. I just would be very upset.
mhm.
And I'd let Bill Yocums know about this one too.
So
He knows
Dorothea,
more than he-
Dorothea, are you saying that open space and trails is not
I
interested
was
in?
just gonna ask that. Yeah,
Not as it was originally presented, apparently by Fails. And Bill is the contact that's been involved in this for a long time. But maybe there are changes in a proposal or a presentation that would make a difference, but I'm not part of the, so he would be the contact. I don't know, Kathy.
Okay.
And
Seems
so-
to me it makes sense. It makes such sense to me that I find it difficult to see why wouldn't you, as open space, be interested in that kind of protection? And with TDRs, which can work for good. So I don't know why. I just asked if I could present it to make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. So thanks, Susanna.
Yep, I appreciate the information.
And I'm sure Bill would be very happy to hear from you, and see what he could do.
Okay. So we're ready to move on. Is there any more commissioner comments? Okay, well, let's move on to our first item of new business, 617 Redstone Boulevard. And what we do usually is I'll make a presentation and kind of summarize my staff comments. I'll give you, the applicant, a chance to make a presentation and discuss the project more fully, and then we'll go back to board questions, and then we'll go to the vote after that, or board comments, sorry, and then the vote. So, Jason, you want to, I guess I can just start.
That sounds good.
So this project is new construction on a 50-foot frontage lot on the west side of the boulevard. And you'll see a slight variation between my description of the sides of the building and the way the elevations are labeled on the drawings, just because I tend to always make the north, the boulevard runs north-south, so north is the long side and the east and west are the short sides. I think the way the elevations are labeled on the drawings are slightly different. So I just wanted to point that little thing out, just for orientation. So there are a couple of major issues. Overall, I think the house and the garage that they're proposing are appropriate. I think there are really only two areas that need a lot of discussion. The first of those is the floodplain measurement. As you recall, we have a kind of a variable height limitation due to the floodplain elevation on any individual lot. And we just need a little bit of clarification from the applicant on the exact flood elevation on this site, because they're asking for that 1 foot additional height for the floodplain. And we basically only award that when it's specifically mathematically calculated out. So that's just a piece of information that I don't have that we would need to get from the applicant. The other large issue that I think we'll spend most of the time talking about are the dormers on this building. The way the guidelines are written, we allow for dormers to be exempt from the plate height elevation that's part of the land use code to give some people relief and usability of the upper level. The reason why we designed guidelines specific to what kinds and sizes of dormers could be created and be exempt from the plate height restrictions was that we didn't want to basically see a low pitched roof disguised as a steeper roof, that there needed to be some substantial higher pitched roof plane visible from the boulevard. So this applicant is asking for an exemption an exemption from 3 of our dormer guidelines. And I will specifically jump to those. The first is the minimum 18-inch separation in height from the main ridge of the building to the ridge of the dormer. So that would either be a gable dormer ridge or where a shed dormer takes off from the roof plane. So this proposal has the dormers extending all the way up to the main ridge line. The second guideline is that there are no dormers in the front third of the length of the footprint.
Right.
Right now, the dormers on both the main residence and the garage are only set back 18 inches from the front of the building on both sides, on both buildings. This is really the kind of critical thing about making the roof appear to be a 12-12 pitch, as opposed to the 3 and 12 pitch that the dormer ends up being. It just becomes highly visible and makes a lot of wall plane extending up to the higher level. There's a little bit of complication with this particular proposal, and I've looked at a couple of different scenarios because the roof extends over the porches on the back of both buildings. You'll see in the discussion that I talk about, the actual footprint of the building or the extended roof. And I've sort of done the calculations for both of those scenarios. So you can kind of decide how you want to treat that relative to the square footage question that I'm going to go to next. I should mention that if the 1/3 of the length were observed, in this case, the main building would be a 10-foot setback, and that's just with the footprint of the building, not the extended roof section. And on the garage, it would be 5'6", and that's just the footprint of the building, not the extended roof covering the decks. So those are kind of the least restrictive of the ways to think about that dimension. If I included the extended porch lengths, then those numbers go up, and you'll see that in the memo. The guidelines also restrict the footprint of all the dormers to 30% of the respective roof planes.
Right.
This is where it gets a bit crazy, just because the calculations go a little crazy. I'm calculating the roof planes on the diagonal, so it's the actual plane of the roof surface. I'm calculating the dormer as the footprint, so the area that the dormer covers in the floor plan. So that gives basically an advantage to the dormer. And we're saying, and the guideline says 30% of that roof plane can be dormer, but that's the maximum. In this case, the, let's see, the main house would allow for a 323 square foot dormer on the main building, total dormer, and 195 total square feet on the garage. The proposed dormers are 562 square feet on the main building and 342 square feet on the garage. So the main building is at 52% and the garage is also at 52%. If we were to take both footprints, then those numbers go up to basically 90% coverage. So I wanted to give you a sense that, you know, these are substantial
Yep.
alterations to the guidelines. The our dormer calculations don't exempt floor area, so the project is in the floor area, you know, is within the floor area limitation. And our dormer guidelines don't affect that one way or the other. So the floor area that they're using in the dormers is in their overall floor area calculation. If we were going to shrink the dormers, then the buildings would potentially get bigger on the footprint, excuse me, to use up that additional floor area. So that's just a side note. Again, the exempt dormer was designed to give some relief from the plate height calculations, but the intent of it was not to allow the building to be fully rise to that higher plate height than what is allowed by the zoning code. So I can't really support the design as it is with the dormers the way they're drawn. The other items in terms of the overall scale and massing, the size of the buildings, the detailing of the buildings, I didn't have particularly any issues. I think the materials that they're proposing, the design of the windows and doors are fine. There's a bay window on the back corner that I thought would be worth having a discussion about because it is a pretty significant departure from the character of the other windows on the building. And let's see. There is a stone base proposed for the main building. And I thought that should also be something we discuss. We discourage the use of stone as a decorative material on the boulevard. I wanted to point out to you that the roof pitch on the back of the garage is the higher 3 and 12 pitch. Extending all the way to the back there, it doesn't return to the 10 and 12, I believe the main roof is. There is a reference in the application to solar panels, but there's nothing described on the drawings on that, so we should discuss that. And we don't have really anything for the landscape design, and I don't have the specifics of the floor area calculations, so I hope the applicant will address that as well. So those were my concerns. I think the project probably could pass easily if it weren't for the dormer configuration that they're proposing. One of the things I suggested that we might consider is if we, we could find that the design is appropriate, or that the requests for exemptions are appropriate if we held to the setback dimension, but then allowed there to be a higher level of percentage of coverage and have the dormers come off the ridge line in the rest, behind the required setback. So we'd only be making exceptions in 2 areas instead of 3. So I think that's worth a conversation by the board. And let's see. One of the things that our guidelines say is that we can find that there are special considerations on this particular site and make exceptions. Unfortunately, I don't think that this site is particularly unique along the boulevard, and I think we would be running into this issue every time we looked at new construction on the boulevard. And if we make the exemptions here to the dormer rule, then we'd be making them everywhere, and the dormer rule would basically be irrelevant at that point. So I will turn it over then to the applicant to give us their case. And before you guys start, please state your name for the record before you start talking.
Great. Thank you, Susanna. I'm Dana Ellis with the Outpost Studio, and Rochelle Norwood is on the line. She is the owner of this property with her mom, Gina, who was on right at the beginning. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump right in. So I almost wanted to be a lawyer originally, and I decided to become an architect, but I feel like I'm going to have a lawyer hat a little bit, where my goal is going to be to try and convince you that the design is presented and the exemptions we're asking for are reasonable, not just because of an aesthetic response to the boulevard, but also just based on site usage, site constraints, and the right to build a 2,000 square foot modest home on the boulevard that fits in. So we have an application in for you, and we will be going to through a land use process to get an ADU approved, but the application is for a new single family residence with a detached garage with ADU. We are asking for the height exemption from floodplain, and then the exemptions to the dormer design guidelines that Susanna went through. We looked at the adjacent properties and felt that the scale of this building fit in well from a massing standpoint. Susanna is correct that in an alternate universe, this building could have a larger footprint. And what I'm going to try and show you is that there's actually site limitations that really limit that as a capability. And so creating two-story structures is really the only way to achieve kind of not only the design, but also the 2,000 square foot use. So we have some images on the top here that show the site, and I'm going to just point out in the center here, this is an electrical pole with wires that exists currently, and that is causing us to really inhabit just the front portion of the property. Back here, the vegetation it gets quite dense, and there's also a grade change down to the river. And so our design is encompassing what feels very much like the developable portion when you experience the site, but it's also really the only developable portion based on existing vegetation and existing power lines. So in response to the 3 exemptions that we are asking for, we created some diagrams, and Susanna, I updated some numbers, and I just wanted to clarify those with you. On the top here, we've got the garage ADU, and we've got almost a 6-foot setback from the front face of the roof to the dormer. And this has an 18-inch projection, which is, I think, where that 18 inches might have come from. So we have an 18-inch projection of the roof on both structures. As Susanna mentioned, this dormer moves all the way to the back, and it really is due to access clearance to the second floor ADU in order to get the head height needed to come up the stairs and access a back deck, which I'll show you in the floor plans. So the first item, the ridge of the dormer must be separated from the main ridge. This is an easy one. So one of the ways that we are achieving this house on Redstone Boulevard in 2023 is to go with a prefab company out of Grand Junction called Phoenix House. And the only way they are able to achieve a dormer is if it directly connects to the ridge system that they have. So this isn't, and, you know, could we, you know, jump through some hoops and figure out a site-built dormer? We could, but then we're losing a lot of the efficiency of the prefab system. That will have a lot of, I think, long-term benefit to the boulevard. It looks at kind of the construction of the majority of the house, essentially getting it dried in. It occurs in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So I think that there's a big benefit to kind of the boulevard in that way, as well as an obvious cost benefit to the client building in today's climate. So that one that's the reason for that one in both cases. The no dormers may be placed in the first third of the building. These sections really show you the impact to the areas below 5'6" with the primary and accessory building limitations. And when you look at the floor plans, we'll show you kind of how we've tried to keep circulation simplified. These are small buildings. The primary residence is about 25'8" by 38 feet in footprint, and there's some articulations in there for porches and whatnot. And then the ADU garage is about 19 feet by 22 feet. So these are small structures. So by creating the dormers that we have, we're really allowing there to be 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms on the second floor of this residence, and then a studio apartment on the second floor of the garage. The area, the footprint of the dormer, I do have some updated numbers. They're not necessarily better or worse than what Susanna presented to you. I took the more restrictive, but at the end of the day, the ADU dormers with that extension to the back, this one is at 64% coverage. And then the primary residence is at 49. So the primary is a little better than what Susanna represented, and the ADU is a little worse. But at the end of the day, with the setback of the ADU garage, we felt like that was an appropriate, push we could ask for. This is the existing site constraints that I wanted to show you. So this is that existing electrical pole right here. We are required to have a 10-foot access to that. And we felt like it was appropriate for the historic boulevard for the residents to be parallel to the boulevard and not, you could see the setback lines. We could have canted the residents, but we didn't feel like that was appropriate. Going back 2 slides, you have such a strong frontage along the boulevard with the residence facings. There's no need to do that. Would that allow for more room? Perhaps we could, do a 7-foot setback there if we wanted to, but based on the access point to the electrical line and then the clearance from the overhead electrical lines to the construction, this is really what we're left with. So you can see the ADU garage portion is here. We are able, just based on the fact that this is a lower height and site-built porch, to go within that setback line. This is for heavy equipment and things like that. So we're really squeezing this in here, and you can see this orange area is really the buildable area of the site. It's not, so the solution of sort of spreading it out would also limit yard outdoor space, which is also something that I think is important to the feel of the boulevard. Floor area, we have listed here, we're just shy of the 2,000, and it really shows you the areas of those dormers. So we've got a 3'4" setback of, this is interior setback in the primary residence, and we're mirroring that on the backside because you see the side of this building more prominently. On the CDU, ADU, we've got it at 5'6", and we're making it work with kind of the interior layout for mechanical space and bathrooms. So these are not big spaces, 713 square feet, first floor, 561 square foot, second floor. And I'll walk you through those floor plans, but this is, you know, functional, efficient space planning. Main level floor plan for the primary residence. The driveway access comes down here. I've kind of moved them away from their site locations just for ease of viewing. But, you know, living room, kitchen, laundry, mechanical entry, 1 bedroom and bathroom, garage, excuse me, second floor, 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom and a larger bathroom. This is going to be used for Rochelle and her family. So it was important for us. It's 3 generations of women, and it was important that everybody had their space. And so the ADU being a really functional space that could be used was also important. It's small, but it's mighty. You can see how we're trying to use these spaces. This will be a tucked in bedroom area. It's going to be small. It's going to feel, these are not huge spaces. Elevations, I don't think there's a lot of pushback on this, but the general vibe wants to be, a little bit more rustic. It doesn't want to look like a Victorian, but it also wants to have kind of a place. So Rochelle is really focused on using as many reclaimed materials as possible, but done in a really artful way. I'll just keep going. This is the ADU. You can see this stair access, and you can see here how this wraps up the side, and you need head clearance to get up to this back deck here. This is the site plan, and I'll get into the landscape and lighting. We're going with a very simple, metal barn light aesthetic on this, nothing crazy. So Susanna didn't mention that, but it was one of the things in her memo. We're looking at just very typical, adjacent to entry doors, and that's pretty much it. Just trying to keep it very economical. Oops. The landscape design concept is to fit right in with the some of the neighboring properties. Rochelle mentioned it as a cottage garden style. These are the specific plant types that she's been talking to her landscaper about, but it's, would fit right into Pickens County requirements. And then just really quickly, I don't have a slide about the solar, but it is a requirement by Pickens County to have a solar ready roof. And so what we've done thus far is add all of the appropriate notes to our floor plans to get through building permitting. There's no specific plan. And when I say specific, meaning there may be by the time of building permit, but as of right now, we are submitting everything with just what is required for building permit. And I'd like to propose that any solar conversations be happened administratively, but the concept there, if you look at this site plan, we've got gables running this way. It would be solar readiness for the roofs facing south. And that is a requirement, as I mentioned, by the county. and something obviously, energy efficiency is important, which coming to that, the prefab manufacturing through Phoenix House at a Grand Junction, the limitations there is that the dormers must be connected to the ridge. The dormer form is optimized for energy performance. That's why it's the shed roof dormer rather than a gable roof dormer. These are high efficiency building types. You can see the insulated panels going up in their installation. We've chosen that direction for the economy of the construction type, as well as the high performance of the construction type. And also, especially in today's climate, faster construction durations save money. That's just a truth in the reality of our time. So I just wanted to share that because it did weigh in effect that we were fully prepared to drop those dormers down 1'6". There's no issue with that, especially with head clearance, but it really would have a giant impact on the energy performance and the ability for the prefab company to be able to manufacture that. So I ran through that quickly. I'm going to jump back to what I think is the most telling page, which is this one that kind of goes through the different requirements. What we tried to do was create a diagram that was similar to what the county has in the appendices. So, oh, and then sorry, the elevation ask is for 1 foot. We've got a elevation of 7155 for the main residence and ADU garage. That will be on, and I don't have a stamped version, but that will be on the updated survey. And so what we've done is we've set, also based on code, the top of finished floor at 1 foot above the floodplain elevation. So that is, the ask for that from an elevation standpoint is pretty minimal. It is just kind of what it is, and dealing with the low head clearance heights anyway. I think this would be different if we were asking for single-story structures, but we're asking for 2-story structures, and the dormers really allow for that to be possible. So that 1 foot exemption, there is a little bit of plus and minus there. I would say around the perimeter. Right now, it's a pretty flat site, but there's going to be minor, like plus or minus a few inches here and there. As long as nobody gets hung up on that, I think, we'll have to do a finished survey. You want to have positive drainage away from the foundation. There's a few little things like that, but we're talking about like a 2-inch variation probably around the perimeter, which will be set based on grading requirements that the civil engineer brings. But since the site is really flat, we're not anticipating a huge variation on that. So you can see here, I think there's like a 2-foot fall from this corner to the front corner in total. And that's pretty, and when I say corner, it's kind of what I'm calling like that buildable area. So it's pretty minimal. And then it does drop down a few feet to the river back here. So that is the very quick summary, but I want to have time for everyone to ask questions. And I know you all like to be done soon. So Rochelle, anything to add? No, okay.
All right, so thank you very much, Dana. Really appreciate the presentation, and Rochelle, thank you. It's a really attractive house. We know this has been coming, and excited to see you moving forward with it. And so the next thing that we will do is questions from the RHPC members, and then we'll ask Bonnie if anybody has submitted any public comments or has joined and would like to comment, and then go into some comments from the board. So right now is questions from RHPC board members. And as we go into that, the primary asks are the floodplain exemption, the setback of the dormer, the total roof area of the dormer, the ridgeline relationship of the dormer, and then we have some other, those are kind of the major mass and scale form related things. And then there are some other notes in Susanna's memo and report that we'll want to address going forward. Who would like to start with questions?
I have a couple of clarifications. So do we know what the floodplain elevation is at the building site?
Yeah, it is 7155.
Well, I thought you said that was your finished floor.
No, that is we'll have to raise it to 7156.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then particularly the garage is different than what you presented in your original application materials in terms of the setbacks of the dormer. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, we shifted it back based on interior layout.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out to the commission that the drawings that are included in their packet are slightly different than what Dana has presented this evening. So
the other big shift was the site plan in reality like mirrored itself, and I had let Susanna know that was a possibility based on Holy Cross Energy, and it was.
and I think that we do have the correct site plan in the packet. We just don't have the correct elevations with what you're proposing now for the dormer setbacks.
Yep.
And I did not include the overhangs in my calculations.
Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah. All right, that was all I had.
So does the dormer in the garage now comply with our guidelines?
It still does not.
But it's
Well,
closer.
it still meets at the ridge line, but how about the setback?
It does not. So you can see it's 5 foot, let's call it 6 feet, and the guidelines would require it to be a third of the way back. So, 28 divided by 3, it would need to be this would need to be 9 feet.
And
Which
that
is,
goes back to this issue of what you take as the footprint of the building.
Mhm.
So that's where I came up with, I think I came up with 5'6" on the garage, not including the overhang going forward. So it'd be from the face of the garage to the face of the dormer would be 5'6", based on the dimensions that I had in the original packet.
yeah, because that would be 22 feet. Yeah, so if we take just the footprint of the building, it would still be 7'9", a third back. So it does have a considerable impact to the usability, especially when you look at what that area below 5'6" is. It's almost unusable.
And where is that bay window that has a question mark?
Yeah, so you can see it popping out here on the front elevation, and it is in the very back of the primary structure. And the intention there is to be able to use it as a window seat for the dining area. We're still showing just a regular table in there, but it would be a built-in feature to be able to use that. And this actually is another Phoenix House issue. We had looked at doing a bay window that was triangulated, but which we still could do. But we found a really great just kit, like box kit, because Phoenix House provides just a opening. And so you need something that can fit in and not need to be built in, if that makes sense. So since the house is so small, you can see this living room, kitchen area. The thought there is that you just create a window seat. And it is a little out of character, but Rochelle and I had a lot of discussions about this, and it was really like, if we push it as far back as we can, it's less visible, it's functional. We had debates about putting it on the front facade. And I was like, I don't think it's going to fly. So it is a way to try and gain some additional usable square footage in a functional way.
How far does it bump out from the rest of the building?
It comes out about 6 inches from the stone base. So it's pretty minimal. Now the wood siding, it's about a foot.
Okay, that's pretty small.
Yeah. You can also see, I'm not going to zoom in. I'm afraid my computer will freak out, but this is the system of this building has an exterior insulation and a fully insulated cavity. So this is a very thick wall assembly. That does take away some of the usable interior square footage. That's the downside of this system from conventional framing. However, little moments like this kind of give some relief to that.
While we're on the dormer, not the dormer, the bay window. What is that framed in, Dana?
What do you mean?
What's the outer structure of it? I don't even know what it's called on a bay window, the window frame itself.
It's like a clad system. I want to say this one is by Colby. It's a plug and play kit. So it will match kind of the exterior cladding of the window, but because we're going to go with the same manufacturer for the other ones, or no, it's Pella. My bad. Sorry. We were debating. And so it's like it's called the Pella box window. And it's just, it's a metal clad, self-supporting. It has a minor cantilever. That's why it doesn't stick too far out. And it doesn't have any support. If I go to the kind of simple elevation here, you can see there's no like tie backs. It's just really like a window box is probably the best way to describe it. Like you would see over kitchen windows in, smaller capabilities.
So I have kind of it's probably a bigger picture question because it's not specific, but given the challenges that you've described and a couple of the fairly significant asks in relationship to the design guidelines and this building design, are there things about some of the more minor non-compliances that you've talked about, just like taking them off the table? The stone, for example, or I'd have to go back and look at the list. I'm just curious.
So I would say if it came down to kind of a negotiation comfort level, like the minor items that aren't, I would say the things that are the non-negotiables for us without massive redesign would be the things listed here. It's the things that kind of make the mass and scale of the building with the use of the dormers.
Just want to go back and look at the memo again.
Yeah, and I have that handy as well. The other items that Susanna had brought up in the memo had to do with the stone base, the bay window itself, the solar panels, which I hope I clarified that it's really a county requirement. The specifics of the landscape design, they're still not super specific. And that's primarily because it'll be a lot of, Rochelle is going to work with a landscape contractor, but it will be very owner driven. And then I think that's it. Actually, everything else, it says the garage west elevation roof pitch. And I assume with that, I hope that also helped clarify that it's a function of access. Especially, I think when you see these sections, you can imagine if it's back to this angle, that one I would say is part of this ask for dormer exemptions. It's on page 6 of her memo, if you want to get to it.
And my list is really just things that stood out as potential departures from the guidelines. They aren't really issues necessarily. I just wanted to make sure that the board had a chance to talk about them.
So when do we go around and have comments after everybody's done with questions?
Mhm.
After questions, then we ask for public comment and then we have our comments. Are there any other questions? All right. Bonnie, is there anybody on or has anybody submitted public comments?
No, we have nobody else on the call tonight.
All right, thank you.
We did
Oh.
get some letters of support from members of the community. I believe there were 3 letters of support and they were all glowing support letters.
This is Rochelle. I know we got maybe 10 or 15 by the end of the day today of support letters. People actually, all of those are living on the boulevard and in Redstone, and they actually asked if they could be on the meeting. And when I was reading the meeting invitation, it said, do not share this with anyone. They actually many of them wanted to be here. So, but Dana has the other letters beyond those 3.
Yeah, and Susanna, I did upload those to Sage's.
Okay, then
yeah.
we have them in the record.
Okay, I think we're ready for HPC comments.
So I'll go ahead and start. If that's okay.
Go ahead, please.
So I am on page 6 of the memo. So I've got my notes and I've got my guidelines in front of me. So my name's Nancy Cromie. I think I'm the longest person on HPC at this point. And I take it really seriously. And I've been on the boulevard 20 years. And I really appreciate Dana's presentation. And I really am so excited, Rochelle, that you're going to be living on the boulevard. I think it's a great asset for all of us. I'm not into the stone. I'll just make it real brief. I'm not excited about the stone. And I got that from years ago when there was an applicant that wanted to do metal siding on a house. And I stood up at an HPC meeting, not literally, but I spoke up. And I really just listened to myself in the historic district guidelines. And the board came around and it passed that person, and that person was fine with that. The applicant at that time built the house, everything was fine. At the end of that meeting, I'm just giving you a little history of kind of where I come from on some of this. At the end of that meeting, Joanna Schaffner had happened to be at that meeting I think she was having dinner in town that night. And she came over to me and leaned her head into me and whispered, "Thank you for your purity." And I didn't even really know Joanna at the time. I was kind of nervous around her, to be quite honest. So that's where I come from when you hear my comments. So I'm not into the stone. I don't think it's appropriate. On page 57 or 37 in our guideline book, it has comments, brick and stone are discouraged. Use of brick and natural should be consistent with the level of detail found in the surrounding historic building. And there is no historic structures in that part of town that has stone. So that's where I come from on that. I think the bay window is great. I just think that's fine. The solar panels was addressed, but it is on the rear third. So that's county. Floodplain is FEMA driven, I think. So I think that's probably going to be fine. The elevation calculation part of that. And I really agree with everything Susanna began this meeting with her comments about the dormers and the explanation and her concerns. A dormer to me is an add-on in a building. It's not a roof. It's not part of that whole roof line. And that's what this is. And I understand your problem with Phoenix House, but we have these guidelines that we've painstakingly worked on for decades. And I just feel like we have to stay strong with that. You know, we don't have sidewalks. We're a walking community. We're a walking boulevard. And that massing is real. So I just have to stay pure with myself with this stuff. And that's where I'm at with this. And we would need more landscape design, of course. So, you know, I may jump in there as people have other comments, but that's where I'm at right this minute.
Kathy, Dorothea, do you have comments you'd like to make?
Well, I like the little window seat thing. I think that makes sense for their dining area. And so I don't have a problem with that. I don't really have opinion about the stone, but I appreciate that it's not really part of the look of Redstone Boulevard. And I don't really know how to evaluate the dormers, so I have to defer to Suzanne and Jason and people like that. So it's a dilemma because the design needs a space for sure, but it does look hefty from the front.
Thank you, Kathy. Dorothea? You're muted right now. Oh.
Is she there? I don't
Yeah.
see her.
Yes, okay, I'm back. And I would like to wait until I hear the comments from Jason also.
Okay. Let me look at my notes here. All right. I do think some of the relatively easy things are easy. Agree. It seems procedural to deal with the floodplain exemption. I've been through that. I understand. I mean, even to insure a home in Redstone, you've got to meet those requirements. And I appreciate that that is not a penalty against being able to put together a house that actually fits within the height requirements. So that seems easy. I'm kind of with everybody on things like the bay window that may be questionable. It's toward the back of the house, you know, kind of facing off of the boulevard. It's not street facing. It's in a small house. It seems like it's those little touches that really make a house feel comfortable and special. And especially on a budget, that can be very difficult to do. So I don't have any issues with that. I think as we talk about the more challenge, and I would say, you know, my suggestion is that for things that are just easy to let go, and I guess it's really only the stone, my suggestion would be to let it go. Because then we can, and it's not necessarily about negotiation, but it does feel like there are bigger things at play. If there weren't other things at play, we could probably be haggling about stone for an hour instead, but we'll be talking about ridge lines instead. And so I think just taking that stuff off the table to me makes a lot of sense. It makes it a whole lot easier to talk about supporting the integrity and the intent of the guidelines when we limit it to those things that are really important and really difficult. And I in my mind, and I know we've talked about garages before, as long as I've been involved in the HPC, it's been when garages kind of as a standalone separate element came kind of as the primary structure, as the first structure. And when it's in a the small group of two structures as an ancillary building, and it sits a little bit further back. And given the lot, it's actually, overlapping footprints, one versus another. There's a lot of things that mitigate some of the challenges with the garage in my mind. And things like the dormer extending all the way to the back, that's on the riverside. Given that this is an infill lot, you'll never see it. I think it's really easy to kind of deal with some of those things that are less visible because they don't have a material impact on the character of the boulevard. What I really struggle with is because Dana, you make a really compelling argument, and you talk about, there are things that are doable, and there are things that are not within this building system, and that and we've talked about this as we started to address the update to the design guidelines, that energy efficient construction and high energy efficient construction, as well as offsite built or prefab or factory built construction, and the design guidelines run into one another. And this is like a shining example of, what unstoppable force and immovable object coming together. Because I tend to agree that the presentation of things like honestly, what gets at me the most is that the dormers run to the ridgeline. I think that has the single biggest elevation impact from the street. The wraparound porch, I would say, mitigates for having a double wall, a kind of continuous, nearly 2-story height on what is now going to be the south side of the building. I would say the belly band, where the 2 stories of the panels come together, does it less so in terms of mitigating that kind of continuous 2-story elevation. But when you're looking at it from the street, it's the dormers running to the ridgeline that bring that entire mass all the way up to 2 stories. And we, just as an example, it's my personal experience. When we built our house, it was site framed, light wood truss construction. So we were fighting heel heights, instead of actually building with rafters and a ridge beam, and losing volume with the heel height of the trusses. And so I recognize, like, every vertical inch counts. And we had to study those truss forms to get out. It's a broken truss or whatever it is that allowed that dormer to land a little bit lower. And while during Dana's presentation, I was poking around on Phoenix House's website, I've looked at it before. And I understand why their construction methodology doesn't allow for that to happen. But I struggle with that. To me, that is the kind of single biggest challenge with being a major compromise to the design guidelines. And it seems like it's existential to the design and existential to the building system. And that's a pretty difficult kind of place to be in, where, my intention in asking the original question to Dana was going to be something more like, well, how, what are your solutions? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to get closer, at least, right? How can we have had a compromise conversation? But it feels kind of binary, and I'm not really sure where to go there. I really struggle with that, because it feels like it's binary in a pretty significant kind of compromise sort of way. And that's usually the way that we would give advice, and it's the way we received advice when we brought our house design through HPC a while ago now. Was, here's the issue that we see, come back when you're ready with answers to that. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to try to design, that it wouldn't be helpful, and it wouldn't be appropriate. But I don't even know how to say, see what you can do and come back, because it sounds like there may not be a whole lot of see what you can do. So I'm left even more with the suggestion of help us answer the question, or help us solve the problem. I don't know where to go from there. So I'm very sympathetic, I guess, is the other part of it, is that this technology is is not new, but in this form, it hasn't existed for that long. And it's really incredibly important, both in our climate and in kind of the time period that we live in, to have sustainably built and energy efficient structures. And so I guess, I don't know, it's not out of not being sympathetic, but I feel like it almost feels like an automatic impasse. I'm not sure what to do there. So Dorothea, that's really helpful, right?
Yes, it is, because you have the terminology and you express my concerns. And I agree with you. I would like to know an option.
Can I ask if we could even reframe the question a little bit more? Do people have an issue with the dormers as presented on the garage? Since that is less visible from the boulevard, and there is a significant setback of the dormers from the face of the building. And if we could sort of take that off the table, even if the main house is still kind of up for discussion.
I, for one, could. Yeah, I feel like that is there are extenuating circumstances, and that is mitigated by its location, and it's tucking in behind the main building. Yeah, simply yes.
I agree with that one.
And Susanna, do you mind if I make one clarifying statement
Sure.
about the construction methodology? So the dormer connection to the ridge line, as I mentioned, is a for sure thing. However, on the primary structure, there is some leeway with the ability to set it back farther. It's not going to be symmetrical per se from the back based on that. But we could probably bring it an additional, if it's at 3'4" now, you can see this door right here. It needs to sort of clear the door clearance is kind of the big thing on this front facade. And then you could see it really cuts off a portion. This is a bathroom, but it would not be, it would not be the end of the world to have, a slightly steeper slope in a portion of the bathroom. And on the back side, I would say to this point of the garage, oh my gosh, closet, we could probably do that. It would be a reorganization of windows. But you could see the impact here is much less based on the plate height allowance. So there would be some ability to skinny up that dormer. It still would not meet the letter of the design guidelines as request, as written. So I do want to make that. But the ridge connection, we sat down, we had originally designed it not connected, right? It was it's an easy one, but that one is really the alternative would be not going with this building system. And that would have a pretty massive economic impact to the ability to construct in this climate. Like pretty detrimental. So
One
that's
question that I hadn't asked before is what the plate height of the dormer and the main house is.
Oh, let's see. I would have to open my technical drawings for that answer. Let's see. And I did upload a full set that included building sections, Susanna, around later this afternoon. So that's in that set. So let me open that up. Full set. Here we go. So this has a lot of what we just went over. Let me see if I can jump to it. Let's see if it's dimensioned. It is not, but I would say at it just scale wise, we're looking at about 9 foot
Mhm.
spring point to this point here.
So
That actually sounds right.
one suggestion would be, or one additional question would be, can that pitch increase and slope
Yes.
to bring it down so that it's really up at the head of the windows? I think that would mitigate some of that tall wall feeling on the elevations.
It can, however, the 312 was driven by the ADU roof
And
and
I-
us wanting to create a, a similar roof pitch between the ADU dormer and the house dormer, but 100% on the primary residence, it could increase.
And the board can certainly weigh in on, I don't think that that shift in pitch between the house and the garage is a big deal if we're going to get less wall surface on the main house.
This was me looking at the design guidelines and saying, okay, well, you want that similar, one of the rules was dormer pitches should match. Now, it didn't say per accessory and primary, it said per structure. So
But
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that was why we did that, but 100% it can change and on the primary structure. It was driven by matching the accessory structure.
and I think that's one of those areas where, we can balance out what the guidelines are trying to achieve, to gain something, an improvement in one area and sacrifice a little bit in another.
Yep.
And I don't, certainly, the board should weigh in on whether they have a concern about that shift. But that seems to be one possible solution for mitigating the impact of the dormers.
I would say even from a design perspective, a steeper pitch dormer on the primary residence, I would prefer. So I like, that's fine. But again, if that, it would need to be a decision because it is sort of bending like a gray area rule, I would say.
Yeah, and I know we would need to see modifications, but to me, that's a move in the right direction for those reasons too. I agree.
So Suzanne and Jason, would moving the dormer toward the back on the main house make a big difference?
My recommendation as a potential compromise situation was to increase that dimension from the face of the house to the face of the dormer as much as possible.
Mhm.
And then I think that definitely reduces the impact of that wall plane on the north and south sides that you could see from the boulevard, which is the intent of the dormer guidelines.
It would also serve to help emphasize that the steeper gable, the front gable as the primary kind of form. And so not only reducing the wall plane, but de-emphasizing the dormer is a big part of the kind of limiting the roof area. And so, as I was looking at the elevations, and this is dangerously close to advice, and it's probably really bad. So don't, Dana, you know better, but that breaking away from the symmetry so that, one dormer sitting further back than another, whether the dormers carry the same roof pitch. I know you don't want incremental roof pitches. I like the steeper, but the more they feel like subordinate elements that are not kind of dominating that overall form, the more you can focus the emphasis on the really nice gable on the front and the double double hung window and the wraparound porch, like that's the presentation to the street
Mhm.
that everybody's going to say, oh yeah, you know, when did you renovate this house from XYZ? Those are the kind of comments that people get. Because it fits in, right? It feels like it belongs and it fits in. So to me, that would be my kind of suggestion. And we're going towards a move to table and coming back and talking about it again with some modifications, is looking at those places to emphasize that the front mass and that lower gable, and minimize the impact of those two dormers. Because the other place that we haven't talked about at all, because I don't think it's at all compatible with the way the house is designed, is breaking those masses up, right? Pulling them apart and having space in between is going to complete, like you look at the floor plan, there's no place to do it.
Yeah.
So there are some places that I know that would typically be recommendations that just don't work with this house or the building system.
Yeah, that was a first attempt to look at, could we break it up with a floor plan layout, but they're really with the central circulation.
Right.
Which is an efficiency thing, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I guess in order to sort of move the conversation along, I think I'd like to sort of have consensus on the things that we're okay with. And according to my notes, we're okay with the bay window. We're okay with the garage as presented in this set of drawings. We're okay with the potential future solar panel locations. We're satisfied that about the floodplain elevation calculations and the floor area calculations. In terms of the landscape design, I think the, you know, what we're mostly concerned about is stone retaining walls and formal gardens and those kind of things. And I feel like from what you've presented, it's pretty much in line with what we would hope to see. So I think we can keep that fairly loose and allow that to evolve kind of when we get closer to that actual work. That could be a staff sign off at that point. And similarly with the lighting, looked like it was fine. So I'd like to get a little clarification from the board on the stone base. And then I think we have kind of a general idea of our preferences for the dormers, and I'd like the board to weigh in on whether they're okay with the things that have been being discussed as a direction.
Are you willing to take the stone off?
Rochelle, do you want to respond to that?
My question as a owner builder, so not knowing this answer, with any wainscoting, is it just for looks, or since we're on the floodplain, to me it makes sense to have some kind of protective something that we decide on that's protective, and that's why I went with stone. With the water elevation, just this last spring, my neighbor Sarah Ewell and mine, on the boulevard, there was water right there. So like the water is we're soggy. And I understand we're going to be raised. But I grew up on the American River, and I would observe houses being put on stilts every year because they're on the river. So I'm okay taking away the stone, yes. But I'm also wondering, do we have to replace it with something for that reason of rotting our whole siding because of this water?
So the architect can kind of guide you on what your options would be there, but you are going to be raising it a foot, right? I mean, that's part of the flood elevation calculation. So I don't know that stone's necessary in that category of conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
Otherwise, we'd all be putting stone on our
Yeah.
house because I have to pay flood
Right.
insurance every year.
and I am comfortable. It was sensitive to kind of Rochelle's sensitivity. I think it's almost like a worry, right? Like having a material that wear and tear just really, there's fear there, but from a design perspective, I think what it really comes down to is nobody can predict the future, right? And
No,
if this is like a holding thing of like, yes, we feel more comfortable without it, I think we proceed. And Rochelle, it's just making sure, I think insurance coverage, God forbid, whatever happens, that insurance coverage would repair anything that ever got damaged. We can't predict that,
no, you can't. And I carry flood insurance right now and because I have to, till my
right?
house is paid off. So anyway,
I think there's a house, not, maybe the next door to the south or the one after that, that has metal at the base. And that might be another alternative. I was just looking at our guidelines and I don't really see. Any-
I think we would do a smaller metal flashing just to kind of finish the reclaimed wood. It wouldn't be though this full stone base. This we really set based on sill height, right? If we were to transition this, I would probably propose just, like an 8-inch metal flashing reveal around the base that would help if anything happened. Maybe go up to a foot just to kind of cover the FEMA number. But again, like I'm saying, it's a crapshoot, so to speak. Like you don't really know if you're going to have a flood, where it'll really hit. So it's a give and take between aesthetics and luck and at that moment.
Right.
Well, and Dana, you're likely to have an externally insulated foundation wall, right?
We will, yeah.
You're gonna have flashing coming up out of the ground. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it would need to come up and essentially, the foundation though, we're doing a shallow frost protected foundation. So we aren't doing the typical stem wall. So it makes it a little easier for the high efficiency assembly to sit directly, 6 inches above grade. It's pretty great, actually. It's a really great system. But yeah, I think we can definitely figure out a solution. I think that kind of takes the best stab at that and looks good. And then I think I outlined for you all what I think we can do on this front facade. The other, and no, it's not a big deal, but I started to sketch this today and we had it modeled and I opted to not include it. But we're also going to skinny up the feeling of the back gable a bit, just with exposed tail rafters. I think that it'll actually create a really pretty aesthetic because that's site built. We want to make it doesn't need to be a super assembly when it's over an outdoor patio or outdoor deck. So I think that'll help kind of lighten the feel of that. And I think on this front, if we push this back a bit, maybe similar to what we're doing on the garage, that feels fine. I think we can make that work with the interior program.
so I guess I did have a question and maybe I just missed it on my own. What is the decking material?
So it'll be a flagstone patio in the backyard or some sort of, stone patio. And then up front, we've been talking about something durable. If we transition this all to wood, right, and it's wood coming down, then I would say definitely a wood deck or wood look deck, maybe a composite wood. We haven't actually, Rochelle and I haven't talked specifically about that. When it was stone, we were talking about maybe bringing some stone in to it, but I think if we're transitioning it to siding coming down, that changes that answer a little bit. And I have to be honest, Rochelle and I, this would be an in the moment client architect conversation, so I don't know what she would think if we were taking the stone away.
it's great that Jason, you're here. Our deck resembles your deck. Every time I look at your deck, I'm like, oh, your house looks like our house.
Mhm.
So kind of if everyone agrees on your deck in ways that we can match it to our barnwood siding, I think that's what the direction we would go. How do you describe your deck build, I guess?
It's just stick framed with cedar decking, standard cedar decking.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, wood, cedar stain to match the reclaimed wood would be awesome.
And the guidelines do encourage that as opposed to synthetic materials on the front of the house.
That's why I asked, because we've gone round and round for years with different applicants that had Trex dreams and all of that, and they really didn't get their way. So I just thought I'd better bring it up.
No, there's no dreams about that, thankfully.
Okay, good. Dorothea, you haven't said too much.
No, I agree with what the decision seemed to be coming from, and I agree with what Jason was saying about the structure and what has been said. So I don't disagree with the way the recommendations seem to be going.
I would like to ask, just to Jason's sort of impasse about the ridge connection. Are you as a commission comfortable with that? Because that is a pretty, if that's going to be a holdup later, it would require us to really change direction, and it's something that I would love to get more pointed response on if possible.
Let's see.
So the code requires a 1'6" down, which I get, right? No philosophical issue with this, but it would have a pretty major construction feasibility issue.
What do the guidelines say? That's what we always go to.
Yep, the ridge of the dormer must be separated from the main ridge of the structure by a minimum of 18 inches.
18 inches.
Yep. And we are requesting for it to have no separation, which is a big shift. Now, if it becomes a sticking point, we can push back on the manufacturer. Like, this is why I want to know, like, if it's going to continue to be a sticking point, and my plan is to push back anyway, but if it's like a no, we have to figure this out, that's a very different thing than going back and saying, hey, we know you said this, which is my plan already. I'm just letting you know. We know you said this, but we got a lot of feedback, and they may say, let's look back into it and see if there's a way. And I'm promising that conversation is going to happen. But I think what I'd like to know is if that conversation comes back with them saying, no, what we told you before stands, which I could see as a high likelihood. That is a concern I have just as a representative to Rochelle, because it would require rethinking the construction methodology.
For me, I really, really am going to stick to the guidelines here.
Okay.
That's me.
Good to know.
It's super important. It's such an important category of our guidelines. And it's such a super, important face to this building. And so I'm sticking strong with that.
I would like to point out one thing, which is if we do increase the roof pitch on the dormer, that we end up with a steeper roof pitch.
Yep.
We allow the dormer to go all the way to the ridge than if we
Right.
drop it down. So
Mhm.
that's just another consideration.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I'm trying to figure out the if then, because I would love to know if Phoenix would have a methodology to break that panel somehow without
Yeah,
losing their efficiency.
and
And-
we're definitely going to ask again.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I wonder if there's, it almost seems counterintuitive, but if the ridge line of the dormer could come down, I would feel more supportive of the spring point being higher.
Mm,
But without the ridge point coming down, then my suggestion would be what we've talked about, which is getting that spring point as low as functionally possible.
yeah.
In some ways, it feels like motivation to pursue it a little bit because you may get some more volume out of the interior space. But I think that makes a huge difference in subordinating that secondary mass. So that's where I would be. But if that answer is no, and I'm just looking at the elevation on my screen right now, and getting that spring point down as low as possible. And my house, I wanted nice, decent overhangs. I think we have 18 inches as well. And so the eaves actually overhang the windows themselves.
Mhm.
And our calculation for what was going to work versus not was the egress casement that had to open all the way, that was within a half of an inch of the bottom of the eaves. And so I think that would make a huge difference in getting that steeper roof pitch and lowering that volume. And I think we'll all need to see it, but I could see that being a way to solve this. And yet for the group, we've just gone through this major update to the guidelines. I also think there is, in my mind, a conversation that there's room for this because of it's the building systems and the energy efficiency of the resulting envelope matters here. And like somebody coming with a stick framed building or, rafters and pulling up this huge amount of volume, just because Rochelle's house has big dormers, I wouldn't be terribly sympathetic to that. So that's not a hardship, and it's probably dangerous territory in terms of, setting precedent or not setting precedent, but to me, it does matter. But I also would, on that same note, emphasize that like looking for those places to reduce the total massing of those dormers.
Yeah, I'm following you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I agree with what Jason just said, and I feel if you can make some modifications and we can see that back. And I also ask about lowering the ridge line just to see if there's a possibility there.
Mhm.
It would be good.
Out of curiosity, is the house going to be all electric?
Yes. It's going to hopefully be passive house certified, which is that's not Rochelle's ask. I'm going to selfishly do that because this is such a great building system. But it would be kind of, and it's funny that has an economy when you do it as offsite construction. It sort of makes you wonder what we're doing elsewhere. But yeah, it's going to be a really, it's going to be hopefully a showpiece for what can be done in a very, also in a way that still feels very comfortable, and it's not overscaled, and it's not, it'll have a lot of heart to it, just with what Rochelle and Gina and Ruby are going to bring to it as well. So it's a little dream project.
Historic guidelines are pretty sweet. When you look at it that way, that's why
Yeah.
people want to build here.
Susanna, were there other things? Sorry, go ahead, Dana.
Well, I was going to say I would say probably the biggest issue that we saw in the VR zone district, and there's not going to be a lot of these, right? Like there's not very many buildings that'll come forth in front of you, but the building height limitations were probably the biggest challenge in the request for the dormers. It wasn't actually the dormer things. It was the fact that the plate height really is warranting a single story structure. And as I showed you in the site plan, it really doesn't work well on this site. It's probably one of the reasons this property was just sold recently. But yeah, that's neither here nor there, but that's really the other limiting. If we could have just done a 2-story structure with lots of articulation of masses and things like that, it would have been easier, I would say. Just a little note.
Totally understand.
Not your problem, more of a county problem.
Went through that in spades, doing our house as well. So exactly the same issues.
Mhm.
Okay. The one thing that I'm seeing on the drawings is this little chimney cap business, and you might spend a little time looking at that for the next.
Oh, you mean my stand-in for a chimney cap?
Yeah.
So one thing, this is why it's a stand-in. We are Rochelle and Gina really want to be able to have wood burning ovens in the kitchen of both the ADU, which will, so figuring out this is a new territory for me. Wood burning bread ovens in the kitchen. So it's a throwback, but I know metal pipe is not allowed. And so it's sort of a stand-in for figuring out what the clearance requirements are going to be. But and Suzanne, I'm hoping you can give us a little leeway on that, because it has not been a straightforward conversation.
Yeah.
To get clarity around what that would be, but we don't plan on not following the guidelines. Let me just put it down, we're going to follow the guidelines. But the form and shape of it, that's sort of a stand-in right now. They need a cover. That's what I learned. And I don't know exactly what that means yet.
Okay. Okay, do you feel like you kind of have enough to work with?
Yes, definitely.
Great.
All right. So we are at a place now where I believe we would entertain a motion to table the application.
And I did include a motion with my recommendation, and the things that I have listed as conditions are for the most part irrelevant now. Just the number 3, the revised dormer design.
I'll move that we table this discussion to review the new drawings with the suggestions that we've made to make it less bulky looking from the front.
In accordance with the
Second.
guidelines of RHPC.
Yes.
Okay.
Dorothea, was that a second?
Yes.
A second.
All right.
Either Nancy or I.
Either
Two
one,
top.
either one.
Either one.
Pretty grab.
All right. We have a motion on the table to table the conversation until Dana and Rochelle are ready to come back and talk to us again. All in
You have an
favor? Oh,
idea, Dana, when that might be?
I mean, as soon as possible. This is concurrent with a land use application, so that will probably take longer to get the ADU approved. So I would say I don't know when your March, it sounded like the March date is in flux, and my goal would be to get this to you by March 1st. So, whatever.
It could happen that same night, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, if we're having a meeting, we can add
When,
this to-
what is the date you were proposing?
our next regular meeting would normally be on the 16th of March.
Mhm.
I would need things by the 1st because it is a compressed time schedule because of those missing 2 days. I don't know why it feels that way. I think we do have another case coming for that agenda. I haven't seen it yet though. So we'll just right now table it until that 16th. It sounds like everyone's available for that.
Great.
Yeah. Yep.
The good news is that these changes don't impact what we have to move forward with from a land use perspective. So that's
That's a relief. Yeah,
That's a relief. I was a little worried.
yeah.
But yeah, we'll be able to move forward with that.
Great.
Thank you.
All right,
All
Jess.
right, all in favor of Kathy's motion?
I,
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, the application is tabled and I think we're done. So I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I would so move, and I will thank those of you who have a command of the development language that can say things clearly. I appreciate it and appreciate the help. It's hard when you don't use those words very much.
thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks.
Do we need for the March 16th meeting, the landscaping, like Nancy, you were requesting more detail with when?
I don't know, Susanna.
No, I felt like what you presented is in line with kind of what we're looking for. And as we go forward with the project, you can just submit something to me. And as long as it's in line with what
Yeah.
you've represented, then we're fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you,
Great.
everyone.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thank you, Dana. All right, we're adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.